here happens to follow the Tumblr of actor and activist Jesse Williams, perhaps even better known for his searing and needful speech at the BET Awards than for his 8 seasons playing a surgeon on Grey's Anatomy. You may have come across a poem 2 weeks ago titled, "Jim Limber, the adopted mulatto son of Jefferson Davis, was another child first." And while I am always heartened by moments when poetry pierces the public sphere, and even more so when it is challenging and innovative poetry like Shane McCrae's, I can't help but find something in this particular venue for this particular poet oddly appropriate. Because, if you'll excuse my ensuing pun, there is something surgical to the exactness of Shane McCrae's lines, an oft-noted delicacy and meticulousness that organizes his work operating in contrast to the racial and cultural traumas that they so often take as their subject. His lines are simultaneously coiled and spacious, and the fact of their quiet relentlessness in the face of their gut-punching content forces a reconsideration of the relationship between language and power. Language like, quote, "wishing your skin could somehow suffocate you in your sleep." His words cut precisely, and there is something terrifying and wondrous about words that, like the surgical knife, are so small and simple compared to the enormity of the gut-filled complexity of the bodies that they open, wound, repair, and heal. McCrae is the author of The Animal Too Big to Kill, winner of the Lutzi Rudnitsky's Editor's Choice Award, Forgiveness, Forgiveness, Blood, and Mule, which was finalist for the Kate Tufts Discovery Award and a Penn Center USA Literary Award. His work is described by the Kenyon Review as meticulously controlled, and by the Rumpus as close to the bone, and by Slate as churning forward with terrible speed, and by me as dude with 15 U's. He teaches at Oberlin and Spalding and has some of the best musical taste of any poet I know. Slate also said, quote, "McCrae writes as though he's trying to stitch the world together." And frankly, I think the world needs that tonight, or at least I do. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Whiting Award-winning, National Endowment for the Arts grant-receiving, ass-kicking, name-taking, and verse-rocking Shane McCrae.
Okay, hi. Thank you all for coming. Jessica, thank you for the fantastic introduction that I didn't deserve. And Noah, thank you for inviting me here. Ruchi, thank you for helping to make this happen. Okay. Oh, I forgot something. I forgot the things I was going to read. Give me 1 second. That would be cool if I had them. Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, well, because I had my phone in my hand, and so I was just thinking like, all right. So lately, like every time I read, I print out a list of things I'm going to read, and I'm like, okay, got it. And then I get to where I'm going to read, and there's no printer or whatever, and then I just redo the whole thing. And so while I was at dinner, I redid it again. But it's going to be basically what I was going to do. It's just that I started thinking about how I wanted to start this reading. I wanted to start, I've written a lot of devotional poems, and I wanted to start with one of those, but I couldn't think which one felt right, I guess. And so I was looking at a manuscript of The Animal Too Big to Kill, which is all the devotional poems, trying to figure out which one would maybe make sense with what I'm going to read next. And actually, I think I'm going to do this one. So this is a poem from The Animal Too Big to Kill. After this, it's going to be all new stuff, I guess. This is called, can y'all hear me all right? Is this cool? This is called Mary Massages His Feet with Perfume Worth What a Worker Makes in a Year. I would have, Lord, as Judas did, wondered, and maybe if I had been brave as Judas was, I might have said something about it, why the perfume Mary massaged your feet with wasn't, instead, sold and the money given to the poor. A few years back, I worked, Lord, in a factory making parts for truck engines, I think. I wasn't sure then, and I'm not sure now. I didn't mind the work, except the standing hurt my feet. It got so bad, eventually I had to quit. I was a temp anyway, and I didn't care what the boss thought. I didn't know who the boss was, but I didn't want to disappoint the agency. Still, eventually it got so bad I had to quit. But at the last station I worked, for the first time I got to sit. Nobody told me, Lord, I could. Nobody told me, Lord, I couldn't. I just grabbed a stool and sat. Like anything I made there, Lord, I couldn't tell you now what the name of the thing I made there was. But sparks flew from the machine and burned my forearms, past my gloves. And Lord, I didn't mind the sparks, I got to sit. I got to sit, Lord, at that station for, I think, a good 10 minutes. Before a worker I had never met, threw her gloves down and walked from her station across the floor to tell me not to sit on my ass anymore. And then she walked off somewhere, disappeared in the pallet stacks. I hadn't said anything back. Or honestly, I might have said, okay. Not drawn out, quick and scared. She was the only woman I ever saw close to my age on the floor. After she disappeared, a man who worked at her station at her table slithered over, asked me what she had said, and said she was a bitch, and told me not to worry. But after that, I didn't sit. That was the day I quit. I tell you now, I know it, Lord, love is, truly is, stronger than hate, only for those who can afford it. So, for a couple of years, I guess, I was working on a chapbook and I finished it up the other day. Thursday. Last Thursday. With this poem that I'm going to read, that I wrote after Trump got elected. I was really dismayed, I guess. I was dismayed about the election, but then I was dismayed about my reaction to it. And so this is the only other short poem I'm going to read, and then it's just one long thing. This is called The Monster. I thought maybe I could kill him. I wouldn't, but I thought about it. The morning after, the long day after, the night of the birth of the monster. I thought about it, and it wasn't just a passing thought, although it passed. I held it, I inspected it, I saw myself, but not. I saw a rifle, just the black barrel, half in shadow, half exposed, floating in a high window. I saw no hands, no body behind it, but I held it. And then the monster's head exploded. I saw nothing clearly after that. People in black suits rushing toward a figure I had never seen before. That's what the monster does. He shows us what we are. So, my next book is, I guess it's coming out in February, and in the middle of it is this kind of long thing that I'm going to read right now, which I've never read. I think part of the reason I wrote it was because I was really anxious about writing it, because a lot of it is prose, and I don't think I'm any good at writing prose, and so I guess that meant that I had to write this big long prose thing. But also because I was interested in seeing, it's kind of a hybrid piece, but it's also kind of not, because it's essentially like two pieces that are stuck next to each other, but that are also interwoven together. Half of it is this memoir, half of it is the sequence of poems that includes the Jesse Williams poem, actually, about Jim Limber, who was, in the last year of the Civil War, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, adopted a mixed-race child. His wife, Verina Davis, had seen the child's mother beating him in the road and was very upset, apparently, and just took the child away from her. And so Limber was living with the Davises for the whole end of the Civil War. And that's sort of half of what I'm going to read next. And when I was working on it, I was thinking about, like, how do I make this thing work? It felt really important to me to make formal distinctions between when Jim Limber talks and Jefferson Davis talks, as he's going to do. And so Limber talks entirely in sonnets, and pretty strict ones, not like, I mean, like 14 lines, I have a pentameter, One is a Petrarchan sonnet, there's some Spenserian sonnets, Shakespearean sonnets, they all stick to the forms they're supposed to stick to. And Davis talks in like the most boring syllabics possible. It's 10 syllables per line, which is how I thought maybe he would think about it. Think about what you're supposed to do if you're going to write iambic pentameter. And it was important to me to make the formal distinction between them. But anyway, and no, I told you that's not interesting. So this is called Purgatory, a Memoir / A Son and a Father of Sons. And it has 2 epigraphs. One is from Priscilla Becker, and that goes, I myself prefer to be left face up in a ditch and for someone to go to jail because of what he's done to me. And the other is from Sophocles, and it's Ajax, he's inside a temple, I believe, and he says, boy, where is my child? So, 1. Most mornings on my way to school, I would stop on the bridge Most mornings on my way to school, I would stop on the bridge over the branch of the creek that separated the school from my house and peer through the railing down at the minnows twisting in the pale current. Some afternoons, and sometimes on the weekends, I would climb through the thick bushes behind the school. I would push violently, sometimes knocking whole trees down, sometimes stomping on them, imagining myself hacking through a faraway jungle. And once I brought one of my grandfather's machetes with me, his only souvenirs from the army, although he hadn't fought in the war. 2 machetes and a pair of boots, and hacked so desperately, so gleefully then, that I didn't get anywhere, but stood in one spot, hacking, and through the bamboo trees beyond the bushes, to the village of abandoned and rotting houses in the placeless clearing. Two houses, both wooden and both painted brown, although most of the paint had peeled away, stood in the center of the village, if one were facing the village, having just emerged from the bamboo forest. To the left of the houses, a narrow dirt road led away from the village. To the right of the houses stood a building that looked like a cross between a barn and a warehouse. It too was brown, and brown also where the paint had peeled away, exposing the wood underneath. The village was the emptiest place I'd ever seen, but the warehouse and the houses were full. The houses were full of furniture nobody had used in years, and old kitchen appliances and shoes. I remember several pairs of shoes, and stained jeans. In the first house I walked through, the first couch I saw had been tilted on its back. It lay in a small living room, and next to it was a pair of cracked brown wingtip Oxfords. And a few feet in front of it were two empty, beaten-up suitcases. Otherwise, it was surrounded by old sheets of plywood and fragments of the walls. The houses stood, even though they looked, as if more material had been torn from the walls than could have been in the walls in the first place. The houses in the warehouse were separated by about 100 feet of dirt and patches of broken concrete and thorny, low bushes and grass. I call it a village, but there wasn't more to it than what I've just described. I call it a village because it was abandoned. The words seemed to go together, and filled with trash, and also things I thought people wouldn't have left behind. Things that looked important to me, toys mostly, some whole and some broken, all filthy, mostly in the warehouse. I remember the ivory-colored, stuffed bear I saw near the bottom left corner of the mouth of the warehouse. The first thing I saw in the warehouse, the thing that drew me to the warehouse best. The toys were scattered all over the floor of the warehouse. And at the back of the warehouse, I only visited the warehouse once, after I had visited the houses several times, and didn't return to the village for months afterward. I saw a door, like the front door of a house, but deep and far in darkness. Back then, I was 6 or 7 years old. As now, fear compelled me toward the things I feared. And so I made my way slowly, and I lost my balance a few times, slipping on stuffed animals, or dolls, or fire trucks, or doll parts, to the door, and turned the handle and pushed. On the other side was a small workroom with a desk. A board about the size of a door, but smaller, laid across 2 sawhorses. A dirty chair with metal legs and brown vinyl padding on the seat in the back, and a few shelves full of paint cans. A dusty toolbox, a small lamp with a flexible neck and a metal cup-shaped head, and a Phillips screwdriver sat on the desk. The room's single window was intact, and sunlight fell through it and across the desk, striking the head of the lamp, which glowed. I stared at the glowing lamp, terrified, feeling suddenly near, as children sometimes for imaginary reasons do, death, hoping the lamp was on. Jim Limber, the adopted mulatto son of Jefferson Davis, met his adoptive mother, Verina Davis, at a crossroads. Up north, it's midnight in America. Here in America, it's midnight too. Daddy Jeff says it was always 2 Americas, and he just keeps it law. I don't know anything about the law, except I know what's true and isn't true. But sometimes I'll see Negroes running through a field in the dark and not say what I saw. When white folks ask, I tell them I was happy with Mama, and she didn't beat me often till the war got bad. But we was going north, and I didn't want to go the morning Mama Verina rescued me. She whoops me different, like what she wants from it is love. 2. Later, months after or before, when I wake in the sharp grass, and the large, older boy who a moment, a minute, how long was it ago, had been crushing my chest against the brick pillar at the edge of my porch, and every inch of my body, except for my chest, that felt like it was disappearing, and alongside that feeling, the other feeling, the feeling I had been looking for, the feeling I had asked him to give me, please, after he had offered it, guessing I must want it, the feeling that my body was no longer mine, is now standing above me, and my skin burns where each blade of grass touches it, and I feel the world more particularly than I've ever felt it before. And so I hurt in a way I've never hurt before. When I wake, the first question I ask, thinking it would be like this, to return to my body, burning, is, am I dead? And the large, older boy doesn't answer me. The large, older boy doesn't help me up. It's the first time the large, older boy has visited my house during the day, and after he leaves, the large, older boy will never come back. Not during the day, and not at night. I lie in the grass, not sure whether I'm supposed to stand. The corners of the large, older boy's disproportionately large mouth turn down. Then he calls me a faggot and walks away. I was passed around the neighborhood as a child, never from adult to adult, mostly from child to child, and sometimes from child to teenager to child. Not always me and my body, but the rumor of me and my body, according to which I took my place in the world more surely than if I stood where the rumor went. I must have met the large, older boy who, the day we met, told me to leave my bedroom window unlocked for him later on that circuit. But I don't remember where or when. He was much bigger than me. A child also, but old enough and big enough that I couldn't form a clear idea of his age. And he seemed, as all older, much bigger children seemed, somehow bigger than my father, who was, anyway, my grandfather, the man raising me who was married to the woman raising me. He might have been a teenager. I was afraid of the large, older boy from the moment I met him. I don't remember much about the moment itself, but I remember the fear, and I remember he threatened to beat me up if I didn't leave my bedroom window unlocked for him. But I would have left it unlocked even if he hadn't threatened me. When I was a child, I was willing, even eager, to let anybody do anything they wanted to me, so long as they didn't hurt me, and so long as what they were doing looked like the things I saw people doing in my grandfather's magazines, which seemed, especially among the boys I met, common. Not my grandfather's magazines in particular, but most of the neighborhood boys found similar magazines in their own homes, and in which we discovered not images corresponding to any overwhelming desires we might have felt, but guides to the overwhelming desires encompassing us. What I remember most distinctly is not any single act, but the sensation I felt, both empty and vast, as I watched what people did to me, and what I did to them reluctantly, but I would if they asked me to, checking to make sure it looked right, familiar. I was comfortable in that vastness, and afraid of it, and I hated it, and yearned toward it. But not toward it exactly, but toward people I thought might be familiar with it, as my grandfather was, and willing to inflict it. Jefferson Davis, the adoptive father of the mulatto Jim Limber, dreams of an unknowing love. She is a slim young negress, but I know she is my Verina. She is a girl I saw only once, a few weeks ago, in town on an errand with her master, whom she resembled, and his wife who did not look at her, but commanded the air immediately before her own face. And the negress, 3 steps behind, obeyed. She was nobody, she is Verina. I recognize her as she was and is. 2 women in a single body. I stand hidden in a shadow in the dream, watching, but I stood in the sun when I saw her, but things are not as they were, and I stand hidden in a shadow. And as she passes 3 steps behind her master, who had passed half a step behind his wife, I reach for her. And in the way of dreams, touching her, who was the moment before a stranger, I know her, and have known her from the moment of her birth. And in the way of dreams also, she is new to me. As the moon is, she is, both known and strange. I pull her into the darkness that hides me from her master and his wife, and hid me from her before. And there I desire her, as a white man desires a negress, as 2 women in a single body. I draw her close to me, and as I reach for her face, her master's wife calls her name. Verina, she calls. Where are you? And she calls with my Verina's voice. She calls her name and mixes it with mine. Jefferson, where are you? I have fallen, asleep in my study. My Verina calls for me as the moon calls for the light of the sun from across an unknowable blackness. Jim Limber, the adopted mulatto son of Jefferson Davis, inherits the kingdom of the Negro in America. I lived with Mama for a nigger's age. For 7 years, since I was 7, I ain't seen her once, and now I'm almost 8. I think she must be free. Mama Verina, she says it don't matter who your mama was. If you're a man, she says, are you a man, Jim? Look at Joe. I look at him, but I don't see me in his eyes, but 2 blue shadows that ain't black like shadows should be. I look at him, and I don't see no way for me to be a man, but I see Daddy, Jeff, and my face is shadows in his eyes. I look at Joe. He got Daddy Jeff's face. My daddy's white, so I don't get his face. 3. My grandfather, although I don't know whether he would have described himself in this way, was a white supremacist. He wouldn't have been ashamed to admit that he believed white people were superior to black people, especially superior to black people in particular. Indeed, he happily, or really gleefully, would probably be a better word, since white supremacists don't ever seem happy so much as gleeful, admitted to this belief many times when I was a child. But I suspect he might have thought the phrase white supremacist was too fancy for him. He had been, as a child, the younger brother of a much larger boy, and along with his older brother Thomas and his younger brother Raymond, who grew up to become a landlord who would eventually be shot through the neck by a tenant he had evicted a few days before, and would die in a soft-top convertible, blood spraying from his neck, his head rolling slightly from side to side on his shoulder as he pointed toward a narrow gap between two dumpsters, wordlessly urging his wife, who was already crawling away from the car, to safety. As a child, had lived in poverty in the wake of the Dust Bowl in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Because of, and despite this, he hated white trash almost as much, although the hate was a different kind of hate, a sad duty, as he hated blacks, my father especially. I tracked my father down when I was 16. By then my grandparents had divorced, and I was living with my grandmother in Salem, Oregon, where I had lived with my father when I was a baby. And it was then that I learned my grandparents had taken me from him when I was 3, and not, as they had so often told me, when I was 18 months old. And of all the lies I was told as a child, this lie has been the hardest lie to shake. It won't, in fact, not yet anyway, be shaken. When I think about it now, which isn't often, but I do, being taken, I imagine myself as both 18 months and 3 years old, and the scene in which I am disappeared plays out twice. I see the two versions simultaneously. In one version, I'm naked except for a diaper, splashing in a dirty puddle at the end of my driveway in Round Rock, as my grandmother tends to the row of flowers between her new house and her new lawn, her back to her new child. In the other version, I'm fully clothed, wearing a half-maroon, half-gray t-shirt, the two colors separated by a white stripe about a half-inch thick, maroon above, gray below, and bell-bottom jeans, and riding a big wheel my father has just given me. When my grandmother lifts me from the big wheel to put me in the back seat of my grandparents' big, white Dodge 4-door, and as she carries me to the car, I cry out and reach back for the big wheel. I'm afraid I will lose it forever, but then I lose it forever. My grandparents took me to Round Rock. They told my mother she would never see me again if she told my father where I was. The first thing my grandfather did, that was the way my grandmother always told the story. The first thing he did after we moved into our new house was throw me into a wall, the living room wall, the stretch of wall maybe 4 feet wide. In a few years, he would hang a painting of a Native American crouching to touch the still surface of a lake, which he later replaced with a self-portrait there, next to the big sliding glass door that opened to the backyard, which I loved but can't really remember anymore. Not anything good about it. But I remember the time the neighborhood flooded and the septic tank burst, or maybe just overflowed, but it seemed like it must have been overflowing for years because the whole yard, and it was a big yard, was covered with about 1 inch or so of watery sewage. The grass was swimming in it, but also the grass was still, but also the grass was drowned. The minnows clustered there, on the left side of the bridge if one were facing the school, if one had stopped on the way to the school. There the creek seemed to slow down a little before it filtered through the 3 small tunnels underneath the bridge. On the other side of the bridge, the creek emptied into a shallow pond, about 1 foot to 2 feet deep, and about 30 feet wide by 80 feet long. But the pond water was too dirty to see anything in it. The minnows might have passed through the tunnels into the dirty, dark pond. Every morning, I might have been seeing new minnows swirling in the bright shallows. Or they might have known to fight hardest there, at the mouths of the tunnels, where the water was still clear. Against the darkness, the element they lived in pushed and pulled them toward. Jefferson Davis, the adoptive father of the mulatto Jim Limber, dreams the future of the American entertainment industry as he dreams he is arguing his cause in Washington, D.C. The wheel of history turns in the gut of the white man, but the Negro is strapped to the wheel and broken by the turning and nearly liquefied by the turning. And the white man sickens. To him who says we do not pay for the life we enjoy, I say we pay with our sickness. I say our enjoyment is not what you suppose, but it is instead a life of worry and disappointed love. To him I say, yes, we love our Negroes, and with a great love Yankees cannot know and would not want to know if they could. And to those who would